Chapter 13. On Monday morning, another fire nightmare woke me up early, before Grandpa knocked to tell me it was time to get a move on. After I'd gotten dressed and brushed my teeth, I scrubbed the edges of the dream out of my mind by singing songs from Disney movies aloud. As I grabbed hold of my breakfast bag, mini pumpkin muffins, and shuffled down the stairs and out the door, I realized that, for the first time since we'd started this crazy routine, I was actually kind of looking forward to getting back to the fire tower. Something about the new regularity of me and Grandpa's daily outing brought a strange kind of comfort in a time that had been filled with uncertainty. I loved my morning ride on the back of Grandpa's cycle, and after a few weeks of listening to the same awful music over and over again, I sometimes caught myself humming along to a few of his funny country songs. I was tired from me and Griffin's busy weekend and the terrible dreams that had continued to plague my sleep. So almost as soon as we hit the far end of town that morning, I started to drift off. My helmeted head rested between Grandpa's shoulder blades, and I let myself sink into a dreamless sleep. I am not sure how long I was dozing, but I was shaken awake suddenly when the motorcycle rolled and tilted, and I was certain we were about to spill right off the road. "Pops!" I screamed, getting a tighter hold on his flannel shirt. I could feel Grandpa's chest and body shaking where I had my arms wrapped around him, so I grabbed hold of his shoulder hard and yelled, "Are you okay?" A moment later, the motorcycle eased onto the shoulder and we turned down our regular road to the trail. Grandpa slowed down and brought the cycle to a stop. I jumped off and stood beside him, certain my Pops was having a heart attack or a seizure or something. Bear barked, alarmed by my sudden and abrupt movements, but when Grandpa pulled off his helmet, I saw that he was chuckling. "What's funny?" I shrieked. "Why are you laughing? Are you dying?" "Sorry, kid," he said, looking not at all sorry. "I'm fine. I could tell you'd fallen asleep back there, and I didn't want you to sink so deep that you fell off the back, so I did a little swerve, hoping to wake you. Didn't think it would scare the pants off you quite the way it did." "What were you thinking?" I hissed. "You could have gotten us both killed. What if the motorcycle had tipped over?" "By swerving?" Grandpa asked, chuckling. "Swerving's what I gotta do to avoid hitting turtles and potholes on the road. Motorcycles are built for swerving. We weren't in any danger." "What if you'd swerved me right off the back of the motorcycle?" I huffed, growing increasingly agitated. "I mean, I could easily have lost my hold on you and just slid onto the highway. What then?" "Then you wouldn't be feeling so great right about now," he replied matter-of-factly. "But I didn't knock you off the bike, so seems like all's well." "But," I sputtered, "what if—" "You're just fine, kid," he said, no longer laughing. "Calm yourself. No sense getting so worked up over what could have happened when we already know everything turned out okay." I'd begun to realize this was the biggest way Grandpa and I were different. I preferred to be ready for every worst-case scenario so I'd be prepared for whatever bad stuff came my way. Pops, on the other hand, seemed to be firmly in the camp of believing that whatever happens, happens, no matter if or how you prepare. "Fine," I huffed, "but don't do that ever again." Grandpa held up his hands, palms open toward me as a gesture of apology. "Understood," he said. I thought it was kind of funny, but I guess I was wrong. I slumped back toward the motorcycle. "It was maybe a little funny," I grumbled. Then for good measure I added, "But just so you know, steering violently so you swerve all over the highway on a motorcycle is not a nice way to wake someone up." "Won't happen again," Grandpa muttered. He chuckled some more and said, "Did you hear your scream? You can yell, kid." Grandpa started up the cycle and drove, without further incident, the rest of the way to the fire tower access trail. "I'm sorry I overreacted," I said as we grabbed our packs and started our hike up. "I don't know. I guess I just—" "Quit dwelling on it," Grandpa interrupted. "Not worth getting worked up about any further. What's done is done." In a quiet voice he added, "You gotta move on and let it go." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Yeah, okay." I don't know if he was talking about the swerve or about the fire. Really, he could have been talking about anything in my life. But while we walked, I let what he had said sink in. Move on and let it go. By the time we reached the tower, I felt okay. Not perfect, but better. "Can we try going a little farther up the stairs today?" I asked Grandpa. Sure thing, Grandpa said, not making a big deal of it. He just pulled the biggest mini muffin out of the breakfast bag, handed it to me, and headed toward the bottom of the stairs. He and Bear set up shop on the bottom step and looked at me. We'll head up whenever you're ready. I made it almost as far as the tower's second stair landing that morning. While I climbed, I kept expecting that familiar sick feeling to hit me, the need to throw up from nerves and fear. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, the feeling didn't come. As we trudged up the rickety metal steps, Grandpa reminded me to keep breathing and to not look down or back, to just focus on what was ahead of me. By the time I collapsed onto the little platform 2 stories up, I had worked up a bit of a sweat, but I was still able to breathe, and I couldn't even taste vomit at the back of my throat. I was still only a quarter of the way to the top, but it felt like I'd already summited a mountain. Maybe it was just me, but I'm pretty sure the air felt thinner this high up. I could even see farther out over the valley, and I was starting to understand why the Forest Service had set up lookouts like this back in the day to spot fires. You really could see for miles. And I knew firsthand that with fire, every second counted. While Grandpa climbed the rest of the way up to his perch at the top, Big Bear and I sat on that second landing and got used to the view. I already knew I was going to need help getting back down to solid ground again, but I'd made it this far without completely freaking out, which was a big step. I was pretty sure this was higher than the kiddie coaster Amelia had dragged me onto at Six Flags. It was certainly much higher than the top of the zip line at the pool. I wished Amelia and my friends could see the view from way up here. I wish they could see me way up here. By the time we hiked back down the trail at the end of the day, I was feeling pretty good about myself. But because it took a while for me to climb down all those stairs, it was a little later than usual when we hopped on the motorcycle to head home. Grandma had promised us hamburgers for dinner, so I was eager to get back to town. She made really good hamburgers, and almost always served them with canned green beans, dripping with melted butter, that Grandpa had grown in his garden last summer. While we zoomed down the highway, I let myself relax in the warm, dry, late afternoon sun. We passed Smokey Bear and his sign, which now read, Fire Danger, High. The sun had already dropped below the tree line, and the road was almost empty of cars. But then suddenly we came around a wide, sweeping corner and found a car stopped in the middle of the road. There were skid marks, and the car's driver was standing on the side of the road looking bewildered. Grandpa eased the cycle onto the shoulder and approached the driver. As he walked toward the woman, I noticed something behind them, heaped up on the side of the road. Curious, I climbed off the back of the motorcycle, told Bear to stay, and made my way toward Grandpa and the woman. The woman was talking fast, her hands moving like leaves in the breeze, and she was obviously upset. Grandpa was soothing her, his voice calmer and gentler than I was accustomed to. By the time I reached them, the woman had started walking back to her car. Before I could find out what was going on, the woman drove off. Her car made funny clanking noises, but it seemed to be moving just fine. Once she was gone, I realized what she'd left behind, a deer, obviously dead on the side of the road. She hit it square on, Grandpa told me. That's what you're supposed to do. You don't swerve, or else it's likely you'll both end up dead. I stared at that deer, crumpled up on the side of the road. I didn't need to touch it or even get close to know it was still warm. Blood oozed out the side of the poor animal's face, and its legs were splayed at an unnatural angle. It's dead, I said quietly, stating the obvious. Thank God, Grandpa said. Thank God, I blurted out, incredulous. It could be worse, he told me. Could have been severely injured and suffering. But at that point, she'd be nothing more than food for the wolves. Or, worse yet, the lady in the car could be dead in the ditch. Better that the car didn't go off the road. The deer got hit clear on and died right away without any pain. I stared at him as he studied the dead deer on the shoulder, seemingly without any care or concern at all for the fact that a life had been lost. How can you say that? I asked. It's a fact of life, Maya, he said. We all die eventually. You're acting like it's not a big deal that this deer is dead, I said, growing more and more frustrated with Grandpa's lack of compassion. It was just going about his business, crossing from one patch of grass to the next, and it got bowled over by some lady who was probably driving too fast. It's not fair." Tears had begun to stream down my face. "If we'd left at our regular time, maybe we would have hit it, or scared it away from the road, or kept that lady from being on the wrong part of the road at the exact wrong time. Or maybe if it was us who came upon it, you would have swerved, and we would have missed it altogether, and everyone could have gone on with their regular lives. Kid, you got to learn that you can't prevent all bad things from happening, and you definitely can't change the things that have already happened," Grandpa replied matter-of-factly. "But what you can do is make the best of a bad situation." "And what's the best in this situation?" I asked, growing even more hysterical. "Huh? We drag the dead deer off the side of the road and leave it for wolves to gnaw on as soon as we drive away?" "Well," he said, considering, "that's the first thing we ought to do. We don't want someone else to hit it and then have them careening off the road, do we?" I crossed my arms over my chest. He had a point, but I was still angry. How could he be so heartless? Wasn't he at all sad? Grandpa reached down to pull at the deer's hind legs, but after he dragged it just a couple of feet off onto the shoulder of the highway, he stood up and shook his head. "What?" I huffed. "Why are you shaking your head?" "I'm trying to figure out what to do about this situation," he said, and hustled over to the motorcycle. All this time Bear had been sitting nice and still, strapped into the harness in his sidecar. But now, as Grandpa approached, he began wagging his tail and whining, eager to get out and run. I followed Grandpa, knowing the old guy wouldn't bother to pat Bear or reassure him that everything was okay. As I stroked our big dog's ears, Grandpa hastily rustled around in the compartment of stuff attached to the back of the cycle. After digging way down to the bottom, he pulled out a giant knife in a leather holster thing. "Now what are you doing?" I gasped. I braced myself, waiting for him to tell me he was going to cut up the deer for meat or something. "This deer's pregnant," he said, scrambling down onto his knees beside the dead creature's belly. "I'm pretty sure her baby might still be alive in there, and based on her size, it looks like it could be about full term. We've got to get that calf out quick if we want to try to save a life." He fixed me with a serious look. "Now, I know you're squeamish about stuff. How do you do with blood?" I hated blood. Whenever Amelia or I scraped a knee or Dad cut his finger while chopping veggies, I felt all the blood rush out of my face and the whole world tunneled. But if there was a baby inside this deer's belly and we had a chance to pull it out and give a life, well, "I'm fine," I said. "I'll be fine." Before I had a chance to change my answer, Grandpa had bent over the dead deer and began carefully slicing open her abdomen. I averted my eyes, but when Grandpa told me he needed a hand, I dropped down on the gravel beside him, reached my hands into the dead animal's belly, and helped Grandpa pull out a squirming mass of baby deer. It wriggled and writhed alive in his arms. There was goo and blood everywhere, but I hardly noticed. "That's all right now," Grandpa cooed, cuddling the deer close to keep it warm. It was a bony mass of long legs, spotted wet fur, and the sweetest face I'd ever seen. Pops winked and gave me a little smile before turning his attention back to the helpless newborn critter. Suddenly, Grandpa looked a lot less heartless to me than he had a few minutes before. "It's going to be all right."